Makarja, my friends, Vulture Rovesjock, welcome in all of you. This is the Healing Forest podcast, and I am Luke. This is an invitation to join in our conversation and unearth how nature has rooted and supported our guests to blossom and grow within their own ecosystem and life cycle. Our guest today is a certified health and wellness coach from the prestigious Mayo Clinic. He holds a master's degree in mindfulness-based interventions, a certified investment fund director and founder of multiple successful seven-figure exits in the financial services market. In 2022, he was admitted to as a fellow in the All-Ireland Business Foundation, recognising his work as one of Europe's leading coaches and business leaders. He is one of a handful of Westerners to have lived and trained with the Yamabushi and samurai of Japan, a loving father, a devoted husband, and daily sea dipper. It is Justin Caffrey. Connus to talk to. How are you, Justin?
I'm good, Luke. I'm very good, thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, welcome. I'd love to just kind of cast our mind back just so we ground ourselves now, going back to our breath, which will bring us back to earlier on in the forest and our walk, breathing in the hammocks, and like the swaying motion and the childlike feeling of being there, looking up at the canopy, at the trees, the appreciation, being connected, and sharing that with you. So, Justin, what is nature to you?
I think, for me, nature is everything. It's you, it's me, it's this moment, it's breathing. I think especially the breath and being with trees and understanding the importance of their input to our ecosystem, but also their capacity to ground us and our capacity to be with them in terms of the gigantium history that they hold, and the power that they offer and lessons they offer to us. One of my favorite books is The Hidden Nature of Trees, and really getting that insight into how they communicate, how they connect, how they use the mycelial network to monitor each other's behavior, and then how they commune in terms of resources and energy when somebody is struggling. So I think they embody the nature of how we should all behave. And I think there's so many lessons within that. But we're all the same. We're all trees. We're all carbon. We're all from the earth and back to the earth at some point. So I think there's a general disconnect in human society where people think that they're human beings, and then there's nature. There's just nature. And, at the moment, we're part of it. But guess what? It existed a long time before we ever appeared, 200,000 years ago. And God willing, it exists long after we're wiped off the face of this planet. So we're just a fleeting visitor.
Yeah. And has nature been a place that you've gone to when in times of stress or crisis? Is it somewhere that you would find solitude or support in?
Yeah, always. Back to being a kid and being a teenager, I would have go to run in a park, and I always found that sense of lying in a field and staring up at the sky to be safe. Even I can remember many times not necessarily being in school when you're supposed to, and being down the local park with some friends lying in a field, staring up the sky, watching the clouds. Just a great feeling of freedom as a child. And then all through life now, nature is a place that I can go to, be very reflective, slow down, whether that's by the sea or into the forests. And, we're talking about this before we started recording. We're very lucky in terms of our proximity in Wicklow. We've so much access to nature. So I find it as an energy to heal. And even when we were lying in the hammocks earlier on, there's just a serenity within a forest that's just deeply profound. And I think most people are not used to the silence. And it's the silence that's encapsulated by the canopy and the soil and the foliage. And it's just, there's no noise. It's like being in a soundproof environment. I remember being in a forest in Japan, and they were telling me the story about how so many suicides are committed in this forest. And they believe that it's the depth of the silence sends people to a dark place to meet themselves. And I can get that, because when you have absolute silence, all that's kind of left is the capacity to confront the voice in your head. So I think nature is powerful, but it can also be disconcerting for people, as we spoke about. Some people can really struggle to be with themselves and to slow down in nature.
Yeah. Yeah, because we've designed the forest there that it's kind of it caters to people that like if you plonked someone in the middle of wilderness, in the middle of a forest that they weren't familiar with, then that can heighten anxiety, the uncertainty of their surroundings or how unfamiliar it is. So there's an easing into the forest and an easing out of the forest as well. I went to U for therapy after my dad died nearly 2 years ago, and we'll go back into that shortly. But I remember you shared with me quite a lot of what was going on with you previously in your past, and really appreciated that, because I took so many things from that, that I wasn't alone, that other people have these challenges as well. But there's quite a few modalities that don't do that. You're not allowed to talk about yourself when you are in that setting. So something that I reflected on quite a bit was you mentioning that your wife Beatrice went to the hills after your son had died, after Joshua had died, and the importance of saying that someone has died instead of passed away or they've gone now, So the clarity of confronting the word death and having died as well, So, but the thought of her, and then I saw her out running as well in Wicklow, and I felt, geez, what an amazing resource to tap into. It's always there, like 24 hours a day, it never closes. So it's like amazing to have discovered that as well. Can you tell me more about that kind of time in your life and the connection that was going on for you, and even the lead up to when Beatrice was pregnant around that time?
Sure. Just as a side issue, what's interesting when you talk about the language that we speak, I bumped into your mother this morning on the way up to meet you, and she said, "Oh yeah," and it's I'm adapting to life now after my husband died, and it was, and I listened to her say that, and I thought, that's good, really good use of language, because I think language is an important sense of ownership around an event. We can often try and avoid the pain, but the use of words can bring us to the pain. And then it's as you get close to it, it starts to dissipate. But the running away from it generally just promotes more pain. but it's hard for us to reconcile that at times. In terms of our story with Joshua, he was our second child. He was born when we were on holiday, and we were only away for a week, and he arrived at 27 weeks unexpectedly when we were in Spain, and we never made it out of that country for a year. So it was kind of an intense holiday. In the lead up to his birth, Beatrice had 4 miscarriages. So we had lots of challenge in terms of getting pregnant. Our first attempt was plain sailing. We decided to have children, and our second son, Luca, was born probably within 10 or 11 months of that decision. So you kind of get lulled into a false sense of security that everything's going to go well, and it didn't. So the miscarriages were a challenge. I wasn't really present to the challenge, to be honest. At that stage, I was CEO of a business, running a pretty hectic lifestyle and company. And now when I reflect back, I can see how much more difficult that was for Beatrice than it was for me at the time. But then when Joshua was born at 27 weeks, he was desperately premature. He had lots of challenges, and he was too unwell to even be airlifted by ambulance out of Spain and back to the UK where we lived at the time. So he had a challenging 12 months where at many stages we thought he was going to be in good shape. He spent 6 months in neonatal intensive care. We then trained as his carers so that we could manage his needs. He was tube fed, oxygen dependent. He had heart monitors and all kinds of technology going on with him all the time. But the aim was that we would train as carers and then try and get him out of there.
What kind of size is he, like physically? Like, is he fitting in?
Into your hand. I mean, he was I think 920 grams, like just tiny, and looked more like a bird when he was born than a human. Like so frail, and then he grew but by the time he died, nearly 12 months later, he just looked like a baby. But at the start, my God, it was really shocking to see. And we were unlucky too that it was 2011. Like now, the medical advances would probably mean that Joshua would have been okay because he had traumatic brain injuries, which are generally dealt with much easier now by cooling down the brain. So today, kids like Joshua will generally live and develop normally. But for him, there was lots of challenges. So he had 6 months in neonatal. We brought him home. We were his carers, but we had to live within a kilometre of the hospital because the medical team would still come to see us. But it was great because we were a family of 4. And then during that period of time, he still had lots of times where he had to go back to intensive care, so we wouldn't be able to maintain his needs. So he was intubated 5 times over 12 months, which is really, really intense for any human being. But for a small baby, it's horrendous. And as a parent, we would see them doing that and literally pin him down, get the tube down into the neck and into the respiratory system, and then he would go on life support. So all the kind of good work that you've done in physio and recovery and helping him goes out the window because they pump him with drugs. So the fourth time that happened was on Christmas Eve in 2010, and when they intubated him, they said to us, "Look, we're not the normal medical team because it was Christmas, and we've spoken to your doctors, And they've said, look, if they were there, they wouldn't have intubated him because he just isn't strong enough to live, which is kind of harrowing to hear because as parents, you're desperately fighting for survival no matter what. And you're incredibly hopeful that, God, the universe, whatever is going to come in your favor. So it was quite hard to hear those words after a really incredible 12 months of battle. But we realized that we'd kind of come to an end, and we knew that when he came out of intensive care, if he came out of intensive care, the next time it happened, he would die. So luckily he did come out of intensive care. We fought a battle in Spain, a bit of a legal battle with the hospital to allow him to come into our care for palliative care. And the biggest challenge was getting them to allow us to administer morphine, because we didn't want him to die in hospital. He'd lived so much in hospital. And ironically, they didn't want to give us morphine because they thought we might kill him, but they were also telling us that he needs to die. So it's one of those conundrums that you come across in the medical system. But we fought the battle. We eventually were able to administer morphine patches because he was going to die of asphyxiation. His lungs weren't strong enough. So it was important that wherever he was and however he died, it was pain-free. So the hospital in the end were very helpful. They set us up. We took him home. And we had about 10 or 12 days then with us in our house in Spain. We still hadn't made it back out of the country. And he died peacefully with us one morning. After a challenge, like the day before, he probably had about 8 or 9 heart attacks. And every time he had a heart attack, we thought, oh my God, okay, he's died. And then he come back again, and then he come back again. And then he had one last night where he slept between the two of us, which was really nice, really beautiful. And then the next day we knew it was coming to an end. And my parents were there and we were organising them to take Luca. And they were taking Luca away. And Beatrice went to get Luca packed up and ready to bring him down to the beach. And I had Joshua. And when she came back into the room, I put him into her arms. And as soon as he went into her arms, he died, which was really incredible. And I think, he knew that that was the connection and that was where he wanted to be. So, yeah.
And was it hard to express love to him, him being so fragile, or you were washing him and cleaning him, or were you were full on hands on? How were you connecting to him? I mean, I've got this image of the bird, like, obviously then he goes the size of a baby, but there's a long time where there's tubes and he's tiny.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a great approach called kangaroo care for neonatal intensive care babies, where the parents come in and you take this tiny baby and you're wearing your surgical gown and you open your t-shirt or your shirt and you put the baby close to your skin so that, moms and dads can do this, which is great. So you spend time every day. So we literally, like, it was full on to be in Spain with a 3-year-old. So one of us every day were spending time with Luca and the other person was in neonatal intensive care with Joshua. But as much as you could, you would have this time where you'd have skin-to-skin contact to help him, because it's incredibly traumatic environment for children to be in neonatal intensive wards. I mean, it's full-on trauma. And I spent a lot of time reading all of the kind of research papers and the neuroscience around trauma to try and understand how do we help him when we get out of here, because we were very hopeful that we'd get him home. But one of the key things is skin contact, close to a heartbeat. So you still have that, but it's not like having your baby at home. It's not like having the real intense cuddles and fun because he is still connected to machines. There's intense noise of medical machines all around you. We still hear like medical dramas on TV. We both kind of look at each other. We know the sound of every kind of machine that you could imagine that happens in any intensive care ward. But the thing about being human is that we have this unbelievable capacity to adapt. And you just do. The strength of our relationship was important. I think it's 70% of marriages fail after the death of a child. But it's even incredibly high just taking care of a kid with significant needs. And we've seen that even in our time in the neonatal intensive care ward, relationships broke down. And inevitably the female tends to be left with that. And I understand that too, because it's like it's full on. And you are thinking, you're like, what happened to my life? And at times we would manage each other's emotions, so it wouldn't be unusual that like I'd have a bad day, and that could be like lying at the bottom of the shower with the water pouring your head, crying your eyes out, thinking, where's my life gone? And then Beatrice knew she needs to kind of step up today and be the strong one, and we kind of rotated that around. So try your best to have that closeness, that proximity. But a lot of the pain, I think, was not having that, and just the intensity of, doctors and don't forget, we didn't speak Spanish. So, and in 2011, very few people in Spain were speaking English. Like it's kind of like the millennial generation in Spain now speak English. But the doctors in 2011 who were in their 40s, very few of them spoke English. I remember one doctor had English, so we'd have to wait for her to come. So a lot of times we had no idea what was going on with him. And even the day when we went in, like it was an emergency going into the hospital, we were 150 kilometers away from it. And I lost her in the hospital. And I didn't even know where she was for like 8 or 10 hours. And then I didn't know if the baby was alive, if she was alive. So language, hospitals, a lot of stress, but incredibly, when I look back in it now, I have nothing but joy and love and pride and fun. It feels like a great period of time in my life. But I do think we have that capacity to pull out the positives even in a most troubling and challenging time.
So that crisis, life-changing year, probably more than a year. When did it kind of kick in about helping others? Like when was there a moment, or was it gradual to be like leaving the hedge fund managerial kind of business environment to go to helping others?
I think, from an early age, I was interested in psychology, and I probably used it for my benefit in many years of business. But the human story was always something that was quite compelling for me. The day that Joshua died, when he died, we were getting Luca off down to the beach, so I brought him and my parents down to the beach that day, and I left Beatrice behind with Joshua. And we hadn't found an undertaker or anything at this stage because we didn't really know when he was going to die. It was, let's just take each day as it comes. So we had his dead body with us for quite a few hours. And when I came back from the beach, I came into the bedroom and Beatrice was washing his body and cleaning his body. And I saw this really extraordinarily primal connection. And almost like what I saw cleaning Joshua's body didn't even look like Beatrice. It was something otherworldly. And obviously we know how to do this, right? Because we've been around for 200,000 years, and as I learned later on, undertakers only appeared in the American Civil War. So we've always taken care of our dead. But again, like that disconnection with nature, when we disconnect from death, we create separation, and separation is always a challenge. And when I look back on that, like Beatrice never went into therapy ever for Joshua's death. And I always kind of wondered, why was that? And when we came back to Ireland, because we decided to come back to Ireland after his death, she walked for months in the mountains with our dog. So I do think that nature connection was really important. But I think the first nature connection was connecting with his death. Like the absolute finality of cleaning the dead body of your child is not going to create any uncertainty in your nervous system as to the reality of the event. And in contrast, I didn't do that. I held his dead body for maybe 10 minutes. I put him in a coffin in the back of an undertaker's car when they arrived. And I thought that I had enough time with him. But actually, it was a fraction in comparison to her time. And the next kind of 2 years after his death, I was pushing against the reality. I would have said to people, oh yeah, I'm doing well, I've got over it. But more in a kind of a masculine, I'm moving on, pushing forward. Inside, I was literally starting to fall apart, but I couldn't really sense it. And then I had a panic attack in a meeting in 2014. And that's when I had a sense of, things aren't really well. I didn't even know what panic attacks were at the time. I actually thought I was having a heart attack or a stroke. But
so you kept going for a few years in the industry, was it?
Oh, yeah. I did 3 years. I built another company. I was traveling 150, 170 flights a year.
All while grieving. But were you acknowledging that you were grieving or no? No. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. No, not at all. I mean, I'd probably talk about it if somebody asked me the question. But the discomfort that I would have in my body to talk about it was huge. If I talk about Joshua's death now, of course I feel it. And I'd rather he wasn't dead. But it's not derailing. But back then it was like, man, I'm not going to go there. So I was drinking a lot to medicate the pain. I was working a lot. I was a workaholic and had been all of my life. So between alcohol and work, I didn't have a lot of space for anything else, which allowed me to try and forget as much as I could. So the panic attack was pretty profound moment, because then it meant I started to read about panic attacks and started to get back into the psychology and neuroscience of it all. And then I knew, okay, this is a cry for help internally from my body. I need to do something about it. And I spoke to Beatrice afterwards, and she said, yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock, you're not well. And she said, I've seen it getting worse in the last few months, and you've stopped petting the dogs when you come home. We've great relationship with our dogs. One of our dogs died 3 weeks ago, but the two golden retrievers at the time. And that kind of shook me when she said that. I thought, wow, I've stopped petting our dogs. So I knew I needed help. I went into therapy. I came from a scenario where my father was clinically depressed and heavily medicated and suicidal when I was a teenager. I was very adamant I didn't want to go down that road. I wanted to find some alternative approach. And I was lucky that I found a psychiatrist who worked in non-medicated approach, using more kind of Eastern Ayurvedic approaches, because he's Indian. Went to therapy with him for about 6 or 7 months, and then trained with him. And then trained with him for about 2 years, and then rocked up to my board and my shareholders and told them I'm leaving and I want to go and work with people. And they all thought I'd completely lost the plot.
So is that 6 years or 5 years or something?
That was 2016. So what's that?
Year
7 years?
Yeah, okay. So,
Yeah.
but it took kind of 3 or 4 years to start putting
Oh, yeah.
a plan in place.
Totally.
Yeah. That's comforting, because people think that, it's a year since someone's passed away and I need to move on now. Or, there's all these certain beliefs. So it's comforting to hear that there's, denial, or there's avoidance, and there's soothing, and there's lots of different ways of doing it.
Totally. And like grief for everybody is very different. And there's no prerequisite in terms of time. Some people can be still struggling 2 or 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later. But the key thing is your struggle being close to your pain, or is your struggle with the pain? And there's quite a difference in those two approaches. It's like, Joshua's dead. Those words are very impactful. Like, even if somebody says to me, how many children do you have? And if I say, well, I have 1, I had 2, but he's dead. Like that is almost like a destabilizing moment for another person for me to say. I wouldn't say that to somebody because it would really impact them. But it shows the power of our fear around death, that it's that impact when you hear it from somebody else, especially around children dying, because it's almost a taboo subject. But often, I posted a video on YouTube the other day, and a woman made a comment saying, "Oh, thanks for that. And my child died a few years ago, and the video's been helpful or whatever." And I messaged her back, and I said, "Well, what was her name?" And she said, "Oh, wow, nobody ever asks me her name." And this is the thing that you find with dead children. Everybody's afraid to talk about them. But having the capacity to speak their name, and like for me, it's always great. My work is devoted to his memory. It's so important, because the pain for a lot of parents of deceased and children, whether it's through terminal illness or a tragic accident, is often around the fact that people are there in the days after the funeral, but then eventually nobody wants to talk about it because they're worried about upsetting you. But it's within the detail that we find peace.
And do you feel like it has a knock-on effect to your relationship with your other son? How could it not? But I am with Luca. So like, I was eating too many sweets. Oh, but I'm overly grateful that he's here, so we'll let him away with the sweets.
I think Luca would definitely dispute that if he was here. I think it made me a better father. It made me a better husband. I think, and myself and Beatrice have spoken about this before, I don't think our marriage probably would have survived if Joshua had lived normal life, because my life was hectic. I was so embedded within my work that everything else was secondary. So when Joshua died, he put a fork in the road of my life and changed how that was going to play out. So I think as a dad, I've been very present to Luca's life, and that's been something I'm hugely appreciative of. But within balance, I'm from my own standpoint, I believe that we have to have structure. We have to have some sense of rules and boundaries in the way that we approach life. And for teenagers, you got to have some level of control. I wasn't necessarily the best teenager on the planet. So yeah, it could be easy to allow things to drift because you feel you're lucky that your child is alive. But at the same time, life is just a delicate moment of balance wherever we find it. So he definitely would say no to too many sweets.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, my language around it may be a bit flippant or kind of, but I'm aware of how the comfort that you have in talking about it, and I feel like it's kind of doing Joshua a service, honoring his memory, the memory of him, and the impact that he's made on your life. So, but me just saying, "Oh yeah, so then what happened?" Or it's coming from a place of me knowing you deeper than just in case people are listening and they're they think that I'm being dismissive of the experience in any way,
Yeah, I think it's an important point, but I also think, like, I've done a lot of work and study into trauma, and we like to categorize some traumas as more significant than others. And I think trauma is such a subjective thing. I think for some people, the relationship that ends can be hugely traumatic. COVID and not being able to connect to family and friends can be hugely traumatic. The loss of a job, the loss of a friendship. So I think it's okay in many ways to be slightly flippant about the reality of Joshua's death, because everything is impermanent and everything will change, and nothing is here for any length of time that's predictable. And it's our attachment to the desire that we want things to stay the same that creates so much pain. So I think it's important to recognize that, yes, my trauma might seem particularly bad, but it's not in any way greater or lesser than the impact of another human being. How they are emotionally, psychologically at that moment will determine how traumatic that is. So I think it's okay to be a bit flippant. I kind of like it because we need to lighten the reality of death, because guess what? It's coming for all of us.
Yeah, I like that perspective, but I feel like, yeah, you have that awareness due to your experiences. As I was saying earlier about that I went to you for counseling and therapy, so that when my dad died, I think it was pretty soon afterwards, I went to you, and maybe 10 or 12 sessions I kind of committed to that. And they were so huge for me. I remember those times where I felt I was retching. Like there was some energy that needed to come out, and like an overwhelming confusion of what was going on with the grief process. And you guided me through that grief, explaining. Yeah, I suppose there was some explaining, but there was a lived experience that you were sharing with me about. Grief can be compounded based on the grief that you've experienced previously in your life. That stuck with me, and I had a lot more empathy for myself when I kind of related to that. And it was an amazing space to be able to share whatever was on my mind and in my heart. And it didn't make sense to me at all. But you allowed me to express those things and not necessarily analyze them. But just when I heard myself saying those things, it was a real relief, So I will forever be grateful for that experience with you and the consistency when my life was so turbulent. Thank you. And from my own kind of perspective, how do you deal as a therapist or like with clients that don't commit to the 10 sessions or the 12 or the 3 or they come and you're like, okay, we're making a breakthrough here. You're getting emotionally invested, and then you don't see them again, or then you get 3 or 4 sessions. How do you stay unattached but yet empathetic?
I think it's, I focus on the Eastern approach of when the student is ready, then so too is the teacher. So working with me is hard, and we're going to explore the depths of your truth. And as you say, quite often when you hear yourself, there's an understanding. Because when we internalize a lot, it's quite different to then speaking and hearing how we feel. But for some people, that can be really difficult. I would say maybe, I don't know, 60% of people probably stay with me, 40% don't. And that's okay. Sometimes they come back as well. But my approach is it's kind of a mix between, I use some therapeutic approaches. I more look at what I do as coaching and working with somebody's nervous system and a sense of themselves and their history, allowing them to explore that, and then just noticing what comes up, and doing that in a very mindful and peaceful way. And if it's for somebody at that time, great. If it's not, then that's okay too. And that takes time to cultivate, because when you do this kind of work, you have a desire to want to help people, and you have to eventually find peace with the fact that not everybody will be able or want to be helped in that process. And like, if we probably spoke about this before at the time, but my approach is so far away from cognitive-based therapy. Like, this is meeting you, your truth, and your reality, and coming to terms with it and finding peace with it so that you can just move on. It's not about tools to avoid. It's the full embodiment of your pain. And it's within that we find a lot of strength and a lot of capacity to move on. So, especially in terms of human performance, like, it's all the things that hold us back. If you get caught in grief, you get into a rumination of historical memories around the grief and what that brings up and how it triggers you, and then that just it can impact and bleed into all parts of your life. So a lot of my work is around, like, typically somebody comes along and says, so, can you fix me, like, really quickly? And for sometimes that's, 10 sessions, 15 sessions. But my job is not to be your therapist. Like, my job is to be fired. And everybody just gets to the point where they go, I don't really think I need to go there again anymore. And then they leave. So it's a far more, like, it's much more akin to the coaching of somebody's nervous system. When they align that nervous system with who they are as a human, and then whole again. If you think back to the historical root of a holy person, it is just a whole individual who is, at one in mind and body. And that's really my focus. We do lots of fancy stuff like measuring people's heart rate variability to show how that actually correlates directly back to coming to terms with who they are and their nervous system and dealing with stress. But in reality, it's just, I suppose, technically owning your shit.
How are you keeping on top of your own stuff when you're helping these other people as well, and you're doing your corporate talks? And what are your main kind of aspects in your life that you are nourishing on a daily basis?
So it's procedural in many ways, because the nature of being human is, we're like worker ants. Without purpose and structure, we kind of fall apart a bit. So I know that I need to kind of manage my nutrition, meditation, time in nature, cold water, movement, walking, slowing down, connection to other people. It's a fine balance. In 8 years, I probably have had 10 days where I haven't meditated. I'm not meditating for hours in the mountain. I'm talking like 20 minutes of just slowing down, and bringing some purposeful meditation. But then throughout the day, it can be just connecting as I walk. So bringing an informal approach to meditation, time in nature, like we spoke earlier on, driving without the radio on. These are also very mindful ways of being, and being present to emptying the dishwasher. Realizing that if we bring presence to difficult tasks, they're not actually that bad. So I constantly monitor the need for my brain to want to move into that desire for distraction, that kind of Instagram scrolling sense that we're all pulled into, and then moving away from it. I've never been in therapy since that time in 2015, and I don't work and with a therapist because I don't think we need to. We are able to take care of ourselves. It's hard work though, and for a lot of people, they just bail. Look, it was easier with you, Luke, because you understand nature, and we were able to commune on that point. But for a lot of people, what I say to them when we start off is that, you're going to have to do the work that I said. You're going to have to have a little practice every day, and I'm going to be talking to them about how they eat and how they sleep and how much water they drink. Because for many people, they have no understanding of the importance of sleep and hydration and nutrition and the microbiome and how that impacts mental health. So mental health now is really neuroscience, and within that, it's how we take care of ourselves. But going back to what I said about the trees at the start, it is like the mycelium network that exists under the trees is there to constantly monitor the level of nutrition and hydration in the trees and talk to the roots and connect that to everybody else. We have the capacity to mind ourselves and take care of ourselves, but it requires you to slow down and pay attention and notice, how do you take care of yourself? What do you need? I often teach meditation classes, and people will fall asleep in a class, and they'll say to me, how do I stop falling asleep in meditation classes? And I say, you sleep more at night. It's just simply your body telling you need more sleep. It's nothing to do with meditation. So sleep is the biggest, I think, impediment that people have. And most of my clients are using wearable tech. And the wearable tech in terms of sleep monitors is highly inaccurate. The best way to figure out how much sleep you need is when you lift your head off the pillow. Are you ready to go? And if you're not, then write down how many hours you slept and sleep a bit more. So I think it's a holistic sense of just minding yourself. But I'm probably, as my wife would probably say, a bit intense on that. But because of my work, I'm very interested in it. So I monitor so much around my own data and stats to understand more and more and more, so I can share it more with people, like in one-to-one sessions, working with corporates. And also I put a lot of stuff on YouTube for free around simple things people can do, because so many people can't afford to work with therapists, can't afford to access anything that's outside of whatever their state provides. And most mental health services are backed up with years of waiting lists. So I think it's imperative on people in this sector to try and share as much as we can.
Yeah, I'm really aware of that as well. Your videos are amazing, very powerful, and they're accessible on so many platforms. Yeah, because then that's hugely helpful for people. Very reassuring and great focus and guidance within them. I'd love to hear about Japan, your training over there and that type of thing. If you feel like that is some aspect you wanted to share with us.
Sure. So yeah, I trained with Yamabushi, and the Yamabushi are the monks who protect the sacred mountains of Japan, and they come from the samurai lineage. So Shunai in Japan, where we trained, is basically the last of the samurai regions, and it's a mountainous area that was very much cut off from Imperial Japan, and the last battle in the Tom Cruise movie, The Last of the Samurai, was shot and focused on that area. So today, when you go to Shunai, a lot of the farmers are samurai warriors. So they're all trained, and their family goes back 1,500 years, 1,800 years. So they are, fairly able to take care of themselves, but they're also just farming. And the Yamabushi were the spiritual monks and the samurai, and it's a tradition and a religion called Shigendo. And Shigendo is a mix of Shintoism, which is the main religion in Japan. Religion is not really a good definition of Shintoism. Shintoism is just really a connection to nature and how we're all part of it. And about 1,600 years ago, Shigendo and Buddhism were brought together. And what's really impressive about Shigendo and the Yamabushi is there's nothing written. There's no textbooks. It's all experienced. And when you go and train with the Yamabushi, it is in silence. You hand over your watch, your phone, your clothes. We wear traditional Japanese death robes and chikatabe shoes, so just barefoot wraps really on your feet. And you go into training. And we go into the most extreme environments that you could possibly imagine. And samurai training is where special forces, the Navy SEALs and these kind of characters got their training from. I wasn't really prepared for that. I didn't think it was going to be that difficult. And I kind of got a bit worried when I arrived there because 3 of the guys who were on the course with me were all ex special forces as well. And we spent 5 days chasing a 72-year-old monk up and down extreme terrain. At one stage, going up the second highest mountain in Japan, at the tail end of a typhoon, when everybody else was coming down the mountain, and being asked, "Why are we going up?" And it was only afterwards, because it was all in silence, that I asked. But some woman was shouting at us one day, and they told me when we finished. She said, "Only the Yamabushi are crazy enough to go up now." So it was a weird experience. We're not allowed to talk specifically about the training, so we have to sign covenants to not disclose and not give away much of what goes on. But the key thing is you are there to meet yourself over and over again. There's no. I think there was 8 of us on this particular week. One of the party really struggled emotionally, and you're not allowed to look into each other's eyes. You're not allowed to talk. You sleep rough on the ground, just a blanket, no pillow, no nothing. There's cats walking over you in this little shack in the mountains. You're woken up at all hours. So you're totally disorientated all the time. No idea what time of day it is. You wake up and it's dark and you're brought out into another hike. We hiked one day for 8 or 9 hours, came back, rested. Oh, by the way, you don't eat either. So you get a rice ball every morning, and that's it. Because you're on military maneuvers in essence. That's the nature of what it is. But it's a spiritual quest. And after 8 or 9 hours of hiking, we came back, we fell asleep, we were woken up again, marched back out into a forest. And we were going in through the forest, and it was pitch black. And I could see at the very front, the Master Hoshino, stopped everybody, and he was called back to one of the monks behind us, who started to hand up a Japanese lantern along the way. So we were only in these forests with literally candlelit lanterns. And as he handed it up, there was maybe 4 people in front of me. The master, who was maybe 5'2", was holding this lantern, and he kind of lifts it up and holds it up in the air. And there's about, I would say, a 10-foot tall black bear right in front of him on its back legs. And it's just kind of moaning at him. And we're all standing there, and we're told always that we stay still, we don't talk, we don't react. You just accept it. Before you go on the trip, you sign these declarations saying that you accept that you might die. And I always thought that it's kind of like an American thing, right? It's not real. But the Japanese, they mean it. So we had some horrendous moments where you could fall off cliff edges and stuff. But the black bear was ready to take us all out. And we're all standing there, nobody can react, nobody can move. And I'm waiting to see what Master Hoshino is going to do. And all the way through this, all the Yamabushi monks, and we're all dressed like them, but the one thing we don't have is a bell. I kept thinking, well, why do they hold bells? So he takes out this bell, and he holds the bell up to the bear, and he just goes, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. And the bear just kind of moans, looks at him, drops to the ground, and wanders off into the forest. And this was like maybe day 2, so we couldn't ask any questions, and none of us could talk about it. So, 3 days or 4 days later, the minute we were all allowed to speak again, everybody just went, "Jesus, what about the bear?" And it turns out that for 1,500 years, the Yamabushi have lived in peace with bears. And the bears have learned that if there's a bell rung, there's no danger, and it's okay. So they found this way to communicate with them. So that was really interesting. But the key thing about the whole training is the connection to nature. It is the sense that we are one. We touch a little bit around Shinrin Yoko, so forest bathing, but also how we can meet extreme physical and mental pain, like sleep deprivation, extreme hunger, and then there's some more left inside you, and then there's some more left inside you. But the last thing about the Yamabushi was that the final day we were coming to the end, and I really struggled. I mean, there's so many times I wanted to stop, but we're coming down this mountain, and there was a torrent of water because there's been this horrendous storm. And as we're running down the mountain, at all times in all these environments, we're told, be present, pay attention, because everything around you is treacherous. So I'm coming down, and I'm thinking, I've done really well here. I really feel like I've been on top of this. And the minute I went into that thought, I put my foot into a hole that was covered because this pathway was just a torrent of a rainfall water coming down. And it was probably 3 foot deep. So I face planted into the ground. My leg was now stuck in a hole, and I was facing back up the mountain, and the water was waterboarding me. So I literally was trying to get my head out of the way because I was now filling up with water in my mouth and my nose. And everybody ran past me. And nobody looked at me because we're not allowed to look at each other. And then the final monk, who was keeping guard at the back, ran past me as well. And that's when I realized, wow, so when they say nobody's coming to save you, they quite literally mean it.
This is what they mean, yeah.
And I was moving between drowning and feeling like I've probably broken my leg, and trying to then orchestrate my body to the point where I could get my leg out of the hole, not drown, and then try and figure out what I do next. So I did that. You have like loads of ties on these kind of death ropes that you're wearing. So kind of tied my leg up a bit and got down the mountain. And it was fine. We had dinner and everything else afterwards. And then the next day I went to the hospital, and I had a doctor look at me, and he said to me, what happened? And I said, well, I was up the mountain. And he said, what happened then afterwards? And I said, well, I came down, and I was with the Yamabushi, and they just did a bit of work on my ankle, and it was fine. And he was going, oh, yeah. He said, I don't know what they did. He said, but, how you're even walking on it is bizarre. But it was just that idea that when there's nobody else around, well, what choice do you have? And it was very helpful for me in many ways, like working with clients, but also coming to terms with that idea of Joshua's death. And like, in the end, it's all on each one of us to manage our way forward. So there was a lot of great lessons there. And I think from a spiritual perspective, it was powerful. And it's one of those things that afterwards you think, I would never do that again in a million years. But I've been trying to go back for the last couple of years, and Japan hasn't been open. So I definitely want to go back again and spend more time there. But yeah, it was pretty mental. There's loads of other stories about us nearly dying loads of times. It was hilarious.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow, what a story. What's coming up next for you? What's exciting you the most now about like either family or business or otherwise?
I've got to do some speaking. I've got to go and speak at UCD in March, and I meet that with kind of equal amounts of excitement and vomiting. So I kind of agreed to do more speaking engagements, and I really find them uncomfortable. I kind of like it when I'm there, but it's the whole lead up to it is just horrendous. So I'm trying to do a bit more of that. I'm trying to kind of, create a bit more discomfort around that idea. I've started writing this year. I'm really interested in taking the kind of leadership skills of that insight around Beatrice facing into the pain of washing Joshua's dead body to really kind of impart that idea that it is always the difficulty, the difficult conversation, the difficult challenge that you have to face into. That's where the growth is. That's where the opportunity is. And it's where we avoid it. We create so much pain. So I started to write and see where that goes. Around the kind of insights into the nervous system and what I've learned about our vagus nerve and heart rate variability and all the kind of neuroscience, nerdy stuff, but really getting into the heart of the story, the human being, and why I think it's, like I talk a lot about this, but her story, her approach is just simply astounding. And she just took the simpler path. So that kind of excites me to explore that more and help people realize that it's good to get into their pain.
Yeah, to embrace it. Where can people keep an eye on you? What's the best place to see what your offerings are?
Yeah, so you can follow me on YouTube. I put lots of really good kind of weekly content around neuroscience and psychology and well-being. So you can find me on there, just Justin Caffrey. I post some stuff on Instagram too, justin.caffrey. Or you can go onto my website, justincaffrey.com. There's other stuff you'll find as well. If you Google me, you find other things that I probably forget about that I do from time to time. predominantly I try and share as much as I can. I've become less good at social media since Christmas, so I need to try and get my finger out of it. It's a necessary evil.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. Grow more. Thank you so much, Justin. Deep appreciation for all of your openness.
Thank you.
Really,
Thanks, Luke.
thank you so much. We are so grateful to you for listening and being here with us. You can find more videos on YouTube. We have 5 episodes. If you like what you've heard and seen today, you can check us out in more depth. Our Instagram is The Healing Forest. The website is thehealingforest.ie. Loads of offerings, loads of good stuff. We would love it if you made contact with us and gave us some feedback. See you in the forest.